Today, we are going to be watching a video by Calvin Smith with Answers in Genesis Canada. This video is called The Last Trick Up an Atheist's Sleeve, so let's watch it and find out what devious tricks these atheists have.
Does atheism mean not believing God exists, or just having a lack of belief in God?
Well, it can be both. It can be either one, whichever one you want. I think it's the person who holds the idea that determines what that idea means to them.
Now, have you ever had an atheist say this? That they're not saying they believe God doesn't exist. It's just that they lack a belief in God or gods. It's pretty common amongst atheists these days, where it actually didn't used to be so much. And there's a definite reason why they've changed this classical definition of an atheist, which is atheos, no.
Maybe it's because the classical definitions of atheists weren't made by atheists. Maybe these classical definitions of atheists were made by Christians, people very hostile to the idea of atheists and atheism. And as real atheists came around, we said, hey, no, we are not horned beasts. We are people with a very diverse set of opinions on God and what God means and is. Now, when it comes to me, I'll say it a couple different ways. One way is, I do believe that your God specifically does not exist because there are mountains of evidence against that fact, notably in the Bible. I would say, though, that the idea of gods in general existing is something that doesn't offend me. For most other gods, most gods where reality doesn't contradict them, like the deist God, it's more of a, well, I don't think they exist, but they could exist. It's only yours, which should have some evidence in the form of the Bible, that I would say for sure does not exist. So most gods that don't contradict reality, I would say, hey, they could exist. I don't know. I don't think so, but I don't know. Yours and the Jewish God and the Islamic God, I can safely say, do not exist.
God, that's what it means. And that's a definite statement. You believe God doesn't exist. See, atheists will...
I don't know if I believe God doesn't exist. I think God doesn't exist. And there is a distinction to be made here between believing something and thinking something. Some beliefs are based in rationality, logic, and reason, those sorts of things. But in this case, it's not, oh, I just have a feeling in my heart that the Christian God isn't real. No, it's, I know the Christian God isn't real because the Bible tells me so. How does the Bible tell me so? Well, it claims to be a work sent down from God, but there are flaws all over it. Like Adam and Eve. Never happened. Sodom and Gomorrah. Never happened. The Jews being slaves in Egypt. Never happened. Jews wandering around the Sinai Peninsula for 40 years. Never happened. Them going into Canaanite and slaughtering everybody there. Never happened. The walls of Jericho falling. Never happened. The king between Belshazzar and Cyrus the Great, Darius the Mede, never existed. Abraham never existed. Isaac never existed. So on and so forth, and so on and so forth. So I think, like, if you're saying the Bible is the divinely inspired word of God, I would say, well, no, it's not.
People often say they just lack a belief in God the way they lack belief in sprites or fairies or invisible purple unicorns. In other words, they're saying atheism isn't an actual intellectual position where they're making an absolute commitment or statement towards a specific worldview.
Well, no, it is a position of doubt. It is fundamentally a position of doubting you. It's saying, in essence, we don't have all the answers. Maybe not even a lot of them, depending on the person. I've met atheists who don't even think evolution is real somehow. Don't think the Big Bang is real somehow. But they also don't believe you. I think really that's the key to all of this, not believing a single word Calvin Smith has to say.
They're actually saying that they have no position concerning God, so don't...
No, that's not what that statement is.
Don't you dare accuse them of saying they believe that God doesn't exist. Well, let's break this down into 2 points here. I mean, number 1, why the change in terminology? And 2, is this an actual tenable position? Well,
the change in terminology is because we started defining ourselves instead of letting people like Calvin Smith do it.
Number 1's easy. I mean, why the switch up here? Well, if you have no position, how can you be attacked on your position? Anyone that's watched a politician for...
That's not how that works, my guy. See, this is the thing. These people, they always assume that they are being genuine. They're being genuine, legitimate, intellectually honest. But the other side, these dastardly atheists, they're a bunch of, like, conniving, thieving, cowardly little...
A few minutes has kind of seen this type of mumbo-jumbo before, right? That the person just keeps talking and talking and saying a lot of words, but they never seem to say or come to any kind of real commitment, so that later...
Yeah, where have I heard that before, Calvin Smith?
later on, if someone accuses them of backing a certain point of view, well, they just kind of deny it and say, well, you know, it was pretty vague earlier on. They don't have to commit to anything. Well, that's a defense mechanism being employed. What they're trying to do by stating they lack belief is to protect their worldview from being open to attack and cross-examination.
I feel like Calvin Smith here has never even met an atheist before. Has he ever discussed atheism with an atheist? Has he ever debated an atheist before? I think we hold our ground pretty well against Christian claims.
No pun intended, cross-examination, but anyway. Here's the problem with...
Cross-examination, that's Frank Turek's channel. Jesus Christ.
With point number 2. And this is the question to ask the atheist that says this. What is it that you lack belief in? Make them explain it. Do you lack a belief in Allah, the Gitche Manitou, the one true God of the Bible? What is God that you lack belief in like? Prompt them.
I would say I lack beliefs in gods that I don't know much about, or the deist God, for example, or stuff like that, gods that don't really interfere with how nature works, or if they do, they interfere by making nature work like there is no God. Any god that is interventionist in the world, any god that intervenes in nature, that is themselves supernatural and acting supernaturally upon the universe, that God I dismiss entirely. So it's a mix of, well, I don't believe in that, and I don't think that's real at all, and I just have no belief in that. So, I mean, I could be convinced in a lot of cases, but I think it'd be really hard to convince me, especially of, like, the Christian God or the Islamic God or the Mormon God. Actually, if you were to rank it in terms of, like, difficulty, I would say the Mormon one is, like, right there at the top. I would say that the Muslim one and the Christian one are, like, right below that. The Jewish one is right below that. The other gods I don't know much about that also make similar claims about the universe that are wrong. You could just put somewhere in between those three. You know, there's a deist God, which is a little bit more likely than all of those, but I don't even see the reason to posit such a thing exists when we have no indication that the universe has ever worked in anything other than a naturalistic way. But then, who's to say that God, in whatever way we conceive of it, isn't naturalistic? What does it mean to be supernatural exactly when it comes to this question of, like, the natural universe versus, like, a supernatural God? What does it even mean to be supernatural, really? That's something worthy of, like, a really good explanation I have yet to even hear.
Is it the God you believe in supposed to have the power to create the universe? Yes or no? Does the God you lack belief in supposedly set the moral absolutes? Yes or no? You see, saying...
Well, see, it depends on which God we're talking about, because not every God is going to have every characteristic. When you say, I don't believe in gods in general, what you're saying is, I don't believe in somebody that created the universe. I don't believe in a magic sky man that just magically poofed everything into existence. I don't buy that story. That's the story you're telling? I don't buy it. Nothing wrong with that. We all have stories we don't buy, and we don't have to know every detail of those stories to know that it seems unlikely.
You have a lack of belief may sound like it makes sense to someone until you realize that once you're introduced to an idea, you can't be neutral towards it. You begin making judgments about the concepts that you're being exposed to. You can consider it's plausible, accepted, think it's nuts, crazy, rejected, or whatever. Maybe you need more information.
Is this guy under the impression that atheists haven't heard the claims of the Christian God? No, I could not list everything attributed to the Christian God, but I have a good enough overview to say, again, that God does not exist. Why not? Well, I mean, first of all, there's no evidence. That's the main reason. But if we refer to the Bible itself for evidence, the case is even worse for the existence of that God. All we need to know is a few things about the divinity of this God in its own book to know whether or not it exists. And in the Bible... well, it says that God created Adam and Eve. There was no Adam and Eve. Boom. That's it. That's all. I mean, this isn't a problem for, like, non-fundamentalists, but I think Catholics really are just pushing it back a little bit. Like, they're pushing the issue back by saying, well, God actually used evolution, even though it's not mentioned at all in the Bible. But God did create the Big Bang. And I would say, if the Big Bang had a cause, which I don't know for sure whether it did or not, but if the Big Bang had a cause, and we can find out that cause... I would expect that cause to also be naturalistic. I would not expect to look there and find God any more than we found God hiding in the other places we looked.
To come to a definite conclusion. But you can't just say any longer that you lack a belief in it, because it isn't it. It's defined to some extent a concept, so you can't lack a belief in it anymore, the way you're trying to frame it. Now, even after explaining this, some atheists are still...
You can be agnostic to things that have been explained to you. What is this man even saying right now?
They're going to say that they can lack a belief in things even after being exposed to the idea, but that's not true. If I were to say to one of my younger grandkids, that I believe in the flying spaghetti monster, and this child had zero concept of what a flying spaghetti monster was and had no previous awareness of it. Well, the flying spaghetti monster, then that I explained, is supposedly invisible and created the universe and lives outside of space and time. They would now have knowledge about that concept, and they've got to either accept that or reject it, or say they need more information to determine whether, flying spaghetti monsters exist, whatever. And you can...
I think typically atheists are agnostic because I think really everyone is. I think everybody experiences this sensation, this feeling known as doubt, whether they admit it or not. Now, there's very strong atheism and very weak atheism, and I think it's more likely to be like the weaker atheist you'll find saying, well, I just don't have a belief in God. I just don't have any beliefs about that subject. That's who you're going to find saying that. It's going to be like the stronger atheists like me who say, well, your God in specific I don't believe in, but there could be others out there, I don't know. And yes, you can be agnostic on these positions. You can just say, well, I don't know. You've given me some information about what you think God is. Now, me not accepting what you say about your God, like right off the bat, doesn't mean I for sure don't believe in your God. I can still choose to not actually have an opinion on that matter and want more evidence from you before making up my mind. And we can go like that for a lifetime. There are people who have been strongly, firmly agnostic for life that have no position on the God issue, that weren't leaning really into atheism or theism. They were just saying, I don't really have an opinion because I don't see any evidence either way on this subject. And that's a perfectly valid opinion to have, although I think a bit cowardly, personally.
Try to play word games and say not having enough information to make the decision as to whether the flying spaghetti monster exists, equals being an atheist towards it. But that's actually called being an agnostic, not a true atheist. You see, the root of the word atheist reveals the fallacy. Atheos means no God.
This man has heard, well, I mean, technically, if you're agnostic, if you don't know whether God exists or not, you could call yourself an atheist more than you could call yourself a theist, because you don't, at that point, have any belief in a God. Thus, agnostic atheism. But of course, our kind, whatever he is here, doesn't want to admit that. Now, I don't know what Calvin Smith does. I don't know what his job title is, other than, like, Answers in Genesis guy. I've never heard what kind of degree he has, what fields he studied. As far as I know, he could just be like a high school graduate who just looks very interesting and also sounds it. I don't know anything about this guy. I don't know what he's qualified to speak on, but whatever it is, it's not this.
So does the term atheist mean you believe there is no God? Well, if used correctly, yes it is, and yes it does. People that misuse it should call themselves agnostics.
Well, thank you for settling that, Calvin. Who made you the pope of whatever people can call themselves? I mean, like, it's not like... I think this is a big problem with, like, religious people. They always want to tell you how you're allowed to define yourself. No, Calvin. I can define myself however I want to. I can believe whatever I want to, and it's not your job to play little word games on my beliefs. Now, I understand if you are, like, trying to get to the truth of exactly what I believe, but if you're just, like, trying to, like, get me to say, well, actually, I'm not an atheist at all, I'm agnostic. Great, that's stupid. Don't do that. That's a bad thing to do to other people. I had to answer the door. Luckily, I was done with the video anyway, but thanks for coming, thanks for being here. I hope you have a great one.